I'm going to say a little bit more about gratitude and mindfulness practice. First of all, to acknowledge that people who practice gratitude, it's been shown in many different studies, are happier, which is interesting in itself. Why this might be. I think there are a few possibilities as to why this might be. Those who've been coming to the sessions for a while will might have heard me say how we co-create the world with our attention. So what we choose to look at and how we choose to look affects our experience of the looking. Of course, this is also somewhat, our experience is somewhat dependent on conditions around us and within us already in ways that we don't control. But it's a co-creation. There is a way of influencing our experience of the moment by the way that we attend to it. And so by noticing what we already have, we are deliberately choosing to pay attention to the good. We are not taking it for granted, which means in the way that we can so often become habituated to what's okay. It's almost like it sort of fizzles out. The pleasure fizzles out by the repetition or the habituation, and maybe we don't notice what's all right, and yet we can very easily be pulled into sharp or focusing on what's not okay. And this is a property of our histories, not just personal histories, but history as a species, as life, which is the survival, the need for survival, and therefore the biasing of our experience towards survival at pretty much the expense of everything else. So at the expense of well-being, certainly. So it's better for survival if we experience pain when there's a threat, even though it may not make us feel good, because that's the spur to act and perhaps save ourselves from the threat that's here. So our minds are primed to attend to the difficult more closely and stickily than the pleasant. And Rick Hansen talks about how the mind is Velcro for the unpleasant and Teflon for the pleasant. It's kind of memorable image. We get stuck. And can't release ourselves from what pulls us into the difficult. And yet, Teflon just when something's nice, it's like the mind bounces off it and doesn't stay with it. So in practicing gratitude, we're actually reversing that tendency of because in order to be grateful, we've got to notice what's good, notice what actually we have, rather than what we don't have or don't want. Gratitude also entails a recognition of interdependence. Recognizing that what we are grateful for are gifts that come from others. Now that might be others in our lives, or it might be our forebears. Albert Einstein said once, I remind myself every day that my good fortunes come from others, living or dead. So we stand on the shoulders of the giants who've come before and who've bequeathed to us their wisdom, their knowledge, their genes, their world. And if we were starting from scratch again, it would be a lot more difficult. Not to say that there aren't difficulties now, but we can lean on the work of those who've come before, and also on the support of those around us. So in gratitude, we are being thankful for something, usually for things that we are not in or have not been in complete control of. It's also an approach of kindness. So opening to others and recognizing them is an act of kindness in itself. So a sense of opening, connecting, noticing, of course, are all properties of mindfulness practice. Opening, connecting, noticing in a particular way. And so, maybe not surprising that being grateful, practicing being grateful, helps us to feel well in the same way that what we know of as mindfulness practice also can steer our experience towards greater well-being. And perhaps at the moment, over recent months, this year, it's not difficult to focus on what's gone wrong. And that's not to say that things haven't gone wrong, by the way. This is not a Pollyanna-ish attitude of, ignore the difficult. Certainly not. But a sense of acknowledging the difficult and opening to the pleasant. It would take quite a lot of rebalancing before we went too far the other way. There's been research that suggests that it takes 5 positive interactions to have an equal emotional weight as 1 negative interaction. So in fact, there's a ratio known as, I think it's called the Gottman ratio, after the researcher who's looked at couples, married couples, and he's able to predict with something like 95% accuracy which couples will stay together in the long term. And he does this by recording the ratio of positive to negative interactions. And he's found it needs this about 5-to-1 ratio in order for stability to happen, because the power of a negative interaction is so strong in us. So it would take quite a lot of focusing on the pleasant to actually bring us into reality in terms of balancing the reality of what's pleasant and unpleasant in the world, not to negate all of the difficulties that humanity and the planet face in so many different ways. So how can we work to shift the balance, to intentionally help ourselves to access what's available to us in terms of the goodness in the world? Well, of course, it's a mindfulness practice, because the first step is to actually notice that whatever is going wrong in our bodies, in our minds, in our emotions, in our lives, the likelihood is that certainly if you're on this Zoom call, that you have plenty that is going okay. The very fact that you can access a computer and have the free time and choice to join here is evidence of good fortune. The likelihood is that you've got housing and electricity. You've got the finances that have enabled you to get the technology. You are well enough in your body and mind to get here. There is relative peace in your environment and in the geographical area that you're calling from. You've got an internet connection. The weather is such that you're not prevented from connecting. So in these kind of very simple, oh yeah, you've had some food today, likelihood is. So in these quite what we might consider to be basic ways, but actually if you didn't have them, you'd soon notice. So by choosing to notice that we do have them when we do have them, we are honoring that fortunateness. And when we shift our attention in this way, there's inevitably less bandwidth, to carry on the technological analogy. There's enough bandwidth. There's not enough bandwidth then to spend so much time focusing on what's going wrong. So this very shift of attention makes a difference, and so does the lingering with it. The act of staying with what's okay, or indeed more than okay, what's wonderful, what's precious, what's delightful, is already begins to shift the mind and the brain. So we incline our mind into observation of what's present, and we're not needing to imagine anything that's not true, rather to notice what is available. So we actually become richer by our noticing. Allen Ginsberg once said, if you've got a rug and you're noticing the experience of the rug, then you've actually got twice the rug than if you just take it for granted. So we are practicing attention, and we're cultivating an attitude. So the attitude of one is actually of the opening, of the recognizing of the interconnection, the being willing to receive this sense of connecting with the world. So we open to what we're finding, and acknowledge that gift. So there's a sense of kindness, sense of appreciation in this. And also we can then reset that intention again and again and again, because the mind will wander off into, what John Kabat-Zinn calls I, me, and mine. What neuroscientists call the narrative mode, where we focus on ourselves and what do I need and what do I not want, and which is a survival mode. We come back, we can practice coming back to this more connected, interconnected reality. So in a meditation practice, this is what we're working with, kind of flavoring our attention with generosity and friendliness and thankfulness. Even if it's just thankfulness of being conscious, or thankfulness of being able to practice with whatever's here, even if it's really difficult. At the bottom line, we're alive at the moment. I was reading that the Navajo have a kind of a way of cultivating gratitude in sort of suggesting to their offspring that the sun is, there's a new sun every day. And so when the sun arises in the morning, that's the only day that sun will pass across the sky. And so to live a day that's worthy of this sun. And it's beautiful because, it brings to mind the kind of uniqueness of each moment. We can become habituated to the marvel that is the sun. And yet, if we can see the sun as a new sun every morning, then wow, look at that. So perhaps we can bring something of that approach to our lives, a new body each morning, a new home each morning, freshness, and then actually practice gratitude for that freshness. Living each day as if it's the only day. First or last, doesn't matter, the only day. How would that change how we live? Okay, so let's practice again together.